notes to teach the play?
So this is a Telemann Paris Quartet in E minor.
Are you going to continue?
Yeah.
to start out by saying this was an elegant performance that shows a lot of preparation, some very fine ensemble playing, and it also points out one thing, I think, which is important also to say to you at the very beginning. We're dealing with a composer who has been unjustly sort of neglected. When you compare his reputation today and the amount of his music that's being played compared to Handel or Bach or any, and lots of other sort of lesser people, he doesn't really sort of fall into his proper slot. He's a great composer. I know this piece well because it was a piece that I played with my ensemble when I was at Yale, with cello, with flute, with violin and harpsichord. This is a piece that requires, I think, and I'm sure it's the case with you, it requires a lot of understanding of why, how, and for whom it was written. So we're going to start out with a little quiz, okay? And don't be bashful. This is an interesting thing for you people to tell this public, because essentially it has an awful lot to say about not only the way Telemann wrote and how he lived his musical life, but how Europe essentially lived its cultural and musical life in the first half of the 18th century. It's a fascinating, extraordinary document, and something which I think has a moral lesson for us today. Let's start out with, why is it Paris? Why? Where does he come from? Let's start out with you.
So he was, I think, he in Dresden before that? Yeah.
Sorry?
Yes, he was in Dresden. When he
Well,
wrote the
not
first
really. I think we're talking about something a little bit further north, are we not? Where was Telemann mostly involved in?
Hamburg?
Yes, yes. So he's a North German, yes? Yes. And yet he's writing Paris quartets. We'll answer that question, or that riddle.
He was invited to come by the musicians, and it took him a really long time to actually get to Paris, but he wrote the first 6 in kind of anticipation.
Yes, there's a double batch, isn't there? Yeah.
And
Now, when you say he was invited by the musicians,
I think the group of musicians who he was writing for were the ones who wanted him to.
well, we're talking about a phenomenon here, which is something which happened up until, I think, the First War. Well-to-do amateurs, but also intellectually curious performers would oftentimes commission works to be played. This happens, for example, in Vienna or in Berlin, where, yes, we're going to ask a composer to write a little serenata for a few voices, or for whatever our formation might be. And do you know the names of these people here in Paris?
So,
Well, you might know who the name of the flute player was.
Blavet.
Blavet, that's right. Can you tell us about him?
He was a flutist working at the Royal Court.
Yes.
And he was quite virtuoso. He wrote us a lot of music, but he also played other instruments, I think.
That's right. But he was a hot item, wasn't he? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what about the violinist?
Guignon,
Yes.
so he was also a performer, composer.
Yeah. And the viola da gamba or the cello, we know who he was?
I think it was Forqueray,
Yes.
the son, right, not the father.
And we know a little bit less about the harpsichordist, but yeah. Well, what we're saying is, of course, is this was a group of internationally minded French people. Now, this almost is a contradiction in terminology, because the French, as we know, are very, very snooty about their culture. But actually, that's been sort of misunderstood over the years. I think the main point to be made here is that this is international music at an epoch where frontiers were more passable, easier to get through than perhaps nowadays, where nationalism was not at its peak, where people could appreciate music from other countries and other composers, where a group of French virtuoso musicians could actually hire or ask our friend Telemann, who spoke French, of course, as you know, to come to Paris and sort of hang out with them. That was all about, wasn't it? And he responds with this music. This says a lot about today as well. Yeah. we who are going to go through Brexit, professional musicians, you know, we who find ourselves, you know, involved with nationalism, even in music and in culture. Yes, to me it's an extraordinary and lovely, beautiful example of Europe together, Europe united in essentially a common culture. It's a very beautiful thing to say. Now let's talk about the piece. Is this piece French? Well, he writes, he speaks good French, I can tell you that, because you can read his letters, actually. This is a fellow you might not know who corresponded lots with good friends. Well, good friends like Handel, for example, yes. And he and Mattisson and groups of intellectually sort of, and very cultivated Germans, sort of kept tabs on each other. You know, one being in London, the other one being perhaps in Naples, the other one being in Berlin, the other one, what have you. Yeah. But let's say, is this him bringing sort of coals to, German coals to Newcastle?
I think he's more trying to represent the French style in his own way.
Well, it starts out à discrétion. Let's sort of analyze a little bit. Give us some ideas. What does that mean?
Well, it's not much in the way of like a tempo marking. It's just kind of up to the performers.
It is, but it also, we're following a pattern of pieces here. This is an exordium. This is the Germans were, and way up into the 19th century, very, very, very sort of preoccupied by rhetoric. And this essentially is an entrada. This is an introitus. This is a prelude, yes. À discrétion, does that mean that you're going to be fooling around with rhythm or notes, things that aren't on the page? Or could that be possible? Does the piece lend itself to that? Yeah, I think so. In other words, we're talking about freedom musically, à discrétion. Yes, it's discretionary, not being discreet. Oh my God, 5 minutes. We could talk an entire day and a half about this piece. I thought it was very well done, but perhaps a little bit timid. Yes. I also regret one thing, that we don't have a continuo basso. This is important because, as you know, these are called quartets. Well, they're quartets because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 people. Well, not really. We have a solo line for the basso, either gamba or cello. We have the solo violin, and then we have the continuo. Is he a solo?
No.
No, he should have been actually sort of buoyed up by one more bass bowed instrument. Yeah, and that would become a real proper quartet. Yeah. What can we talk about the second movement? Très vite. And these are indications of tempi and effect of Telemann himself in French.
Sort of passe-pied-like.
Well, that's a good question. Are we dealing in, are these free forms or are they dance forms? We've got both, don't we? Yeah. What do we call this piece? Yeah, it's unabashedly sort of rhythmic, isn't it? And that's all it's really, yeah. But it's also pretty virtuoso for you and for the flute, yeah. In other words, we're dealing in highly, highly sophisticated music for highly sophisticated and talented musicians. Was this going to be public music? This kind of sort of wonderfully sort of irresistible sort of dance music and these. Yes, this was designed for public performance. This was designed. It wasn't Gebrauchsmusik to play it in one's household, you know, at 11 o'clock at night after a big dinner. That would happen too, perhaps. But the fact is, this was public fare. Yeah, I'd call this a dance movement, wouldn't you? Whether it's a passe-pied, I'm not quite sure, but it's. Do you have something to say about this particular piece? I can say that I found the tempi very good, both at the beginning and the très vite. I found it sort of rhythmically secure, and more than that, I was pleased to watch enjoyment. This is perhaps a trite thing to say in a master class, but to watch performers having fun or getting enjoyment out of a piece they play is something which is very, very rewarding for us. Really. Keep that in mind for the next couple of years, if not for an entire sort of musical career. We go on then to a final closing with the à discrétion, and then we arrive at what movement? The gai. Yes, yeah. This, of course, would have been. Oh, sorry. Does that mean my head's going to be cut off? Yes. Well, look. All I can say is that we haven't even begun to sort of plumb the yes, there's an awful lot to say, but I think the most important thing to say is that you give a very eloquent and very elegant performance, stylistically sure. I would just simply say that it'll become more easier to in the gesture the more that you play it, but already it's got a sense of rightness to it. Yes. Very nice indeed.